Hello, today I'm talking with Elena Bennett about the Seeds of Good Anthropocenes project. Elena, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Elena Bennett. I'm a professor at McGill University, and one of the core folks involved with the Seeds of Good Anthropocene project, I guess, is relevant here.
And what sparked the Seeds of Good Anthropocenes project? Maybe you could give us a little bit about the backstory.
For sure, I was feeling, and I think some of my colleagues who started this with me were feeling a little bit disheartened by dystopian images of the future and everything's terrible. And I was noticing teaching my environment classes that my students at the end of the year would just be like, this class wrecked me. Like, how do you think that how do you go on? Was kind of what they would ask. And it was like, oh, this is terrible. Like, I need to have something to say to that doesn't feel papered over. Like the world is terrible, but we're going to put a pretty bow on it. So some of it was that. I think some of it was a few of us had been involved with the Millennium Assessment scenarios or IPCC scenarios and had this feeling that the even the positive, let's call them stories, but scenarios that were coming out of there, they they were like both traditional and non-traditional in ways that were really disturbing. It was like they told the same story over and over again, like, oh, if we can just fix population, or if we can just fix education, or if we can just fix the policy, it's all going to get better. And we just were looking at that going like, that's not how change actually happens. We need to think differently about change, sort of. So it was like, get better stories, get stories that are positive, get stories that feature things that people really believe bring about change, and not these sort of big abstract things that felt like, oh, you just, like, if you want policy to change, you like wait for the person in charge to do that or try to get the right person elected to whatever. And it's like, I don't think that's how it happens. So I think it's kind of that. It was the storytelling, the positivity pieces, and then we happened to all be at a workshop that was hosted by Future Earth, where they were like, if you can come up with an idea, we'll give you some money. And we were like, oh, this is a great idea, because at that time especially, it just felt like there was no way to get that kind of work funded. It's like, how do you fund something like this? Like, no natural science foundation wanted to fund us, no social science foundation. It felt outside the bounds of academia. And so that was kind of the start.
What I think is really interesting about Seeds is that it takes this wider framing of change. How can we really change these relationships? And I noticed that in the title is the framing of Anthropocene. Like, why did you choose that term over others that were available?
So why Anthropocene? I think, and this may be also a little bit revisionist, because I know this is like some of the questions that are on my mind a lot right now, because I work also on ecosystem services, and just thinking about kind of people and how people relate to nature. And I'm really influenced by Georgina Mace's paper called Who's Conservation, where she looked at, like, this sort of history of how did we conceive of our relationship with nature, where, at first it was like, nature, we can do conservation, nature can thrive because we keep people out. And then eventually it was like, oh, nature can thrive because it gives us ecosystem services and we can value those, and that's going to be awesome. And now I just find myself thinking about, like, we need some world where there's a two-way relationship, where it's reciprocal, and we, maybe learn from some of what our indigenous partners have been doing for hundreds or thousands of years, which is like, this isn't a static thing, it's a relationship. And that, I think, for me, why to choose Anthropocene is, as an environmentalist, I think I had this sense of like, people are generally bad. And when we're, trying to do conservation, it's about like keeping people out or minimizing people's impact. How do we stop pollution or halt this or minimize that? And I was really looking for the like, can't there be a world where the world is better because there are people on it? And not like the world is better and there are people on it, but like literally the world is better because I am here and you are here. And I've never heard that really. I mean, I see it. I see hints of it in, you know, indigenous thinking in Canada. There's a lot of like stewardship and how do we engage with the world and make it better through, they wouldn't use a word like management or governance, but it's, whatever the non-Western version of that is. But I think the way to get people there into that framing is to use that word Anthropocene. Like that means a world that is dominated by people. So how do you have that and have it be good? It's jarring to people, but it's what I want.
Yeah, me too. I agree. I sign up.
We could do it.
How did the seeds kind of filter into your own work? Did you analyze the case corpus, or did you how did you go about picking and using the cases that you had assembled?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say if I step back, I often talk about the overall project as having three goals. One was just to provide inspiration, like, hey, other people have done this and you can do it too. Another was to improve scenario building and storytelling and our understanding of drivers of change. And then a third was to do this like analysis so that you could say to a new project that was starting up, like, okay, here's the stuff you really need to think about. Like, you really ought to think about leadership or context or whatever. And so, I mean, the inspiration part, you just kind of hope that that happens, and we'll leave that aside. And I think I've already sort of said the analysis part, I think we were not super successful with, at least not so far. But I think the storytelling bits we've done a better job with. And there, mostly I would say we would run different scenario development workshops in a place with a sort of place-based focus. So we had one that we ran in Sweden that had a sort of Northern European focus. And we picked, I'm going to get the number wrong, but something like a dozen representatives of a dozen seeds to come to that workshop. And then we had 4 or 5 artists who came, and we had 4 or 5 scientists. And so there, we were limited in place, so that helped. It was like, okay, only things in Northern Europe. And then we really wanted to get the biggest range of ideas that we could. So it was like, oh, there's here's this restoration group from the Scottish Highlands. Okay, let's take them. Oh, here's a woman working on like rejigging the financial system in the UK. Oh, that's pretty different. Let's pick that. Here's somebody working on. So we really tried to get as varied as we could and get them in the room, because I think we were looking for these answers to these questions of, if you're trying to bring about a different world, what are the drivers? What are the variables that matter? And I think that it, at least for me, it unearthed some different things that I hadn't seen in scenario building before. And the ones that seem to show up a lot for me are how people conceive of work, and time was a really big one. There's just over and over again, we'd get this like people working part-time, people in a sharing economy, people doing things that meant that they had more time to give to their communities. And that just seemed to change everything. And it was really a focus, and I'd never seen that in a scenario before. Yeah, so those were the sorts of things that showed up. And then we've done that, I guess, in Northern Europe. I mentioned a bunch of times across Africa. We've done that we did that in the Canadian Arctic. And so the location really drove, I think, in part drove who came in the door to help us in terms of like what seeds resonated or got to play a role.
How did the project change your idea of what transformation is in relation to sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing there is it's definitely deepened my thinking because I had not really been thinking about, well, what is transformation? What does that mean? What's the difference between transition and transformation or change and transformation? I don't know. There's like ecological ways that I define that, oh, we've passed a threshold and now the rate of change relative to the driver is different. But I guess the thing that stands out to me, and it's not a very direct answer to your question, and I apologize, but is that a lot of the seeds that we collected, a thing that I noticed is that they would start intending to be a project about one thing. Like, we're a project about, we're going to build a community garden in this unused space, or we're going to whatever. And often that was like, in our case, that was mostly like natural things like gardening or restoring or, some way that they were trying to improve the environment. And when they got to the other end, they were like, oh, we also changed the social system. Like we made connections among ourselves and it made all of these other things possible. And then, we thought we were just building this garden and then we did this and we did this and we did this. And so I think the one thing for me, I guess, is it at least like grounded my feeling that transformation has both social and ecological components to it and really made me see like, oh, those are really, they're intertwined more even than I would have said before.
And could you tell us a little bit about the crowdsourcing process that you used? Because that, for me, I felt that was really novel and exciting and also difficult.
Yeah. And you see me like screwing up my face at it because I don't love it. I mean, so that's just it. We decided to try to crowdsource and we started with reaching out in as many languages as we could to other UN processes. And, in some ways that was great, right? It led us to this world of people who had insight, who were thinking about the environment, had insight to these things. It also, if you look at any of our maps, it led us to kind of a lot of the same ideas, right? Like one of the things we were really hoping for was people have all kinds of ideas about what makes a better future. And your idea and my idea of what's better might be really opposed. And we really wanted to explore that, but I don't think we got a whole lot of ideas that I would say were like way outside of the realm of what you or I might think is a good future. I mean, we did get some things where it was like somebody would submit a project that they thought was great and somebody else would say, oh, that's a land grab. I think we got a little bit different ideas. Some of the crowdsourcing, we got a second piece of the project funded to do workshops in Africa. And the cost of admission to those workshops was that you had to bring a seed idea with you. And so we have a ton of seed projects in Africa and a ton of really novel ideas because that really was reaching a different base of people than we'd reached before. So there's some heterogeneity there. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I had really hoped that we would be able to get some random subset of all of these seeds and then ask questions about what works really well. Why do some things grow and others don't? But I don't think we were ever like random enough. And we didn't have enough like range of some things that succeeded and some things that failed. They were all like in that proto stage. And so it was maybe bad design or just design that was like we were trying to do all the things, and it turned out that we designed really well to do some of the things and not other of the things?